Welcome to the non-musician's introduction to digital music composition. This is a bit of a bonus lesson because I recently learned that the drum VST I had you guys use doesn't work on Macs. And if you happen to be on a Mac, that's kind of a bummer. So, this time we're going to cover an alternate way to get some drums added to your songs that should work on any platform. In the description, there's a link to a RAR file which has some drum samples in it. These are, let me just get rid of these here. These three files are inside this RAR file. You're going to want to extract those somewhere you can remember. I recommend creating a folder with the rest of your Reaper project files and calling it something like samples, recordings, imports, something like that. Get those files in there, and then you're ready to get started. Now, one way to work with these is to drag the lot of them into Reaper, like so. And this will prompt you to import them on separate tracks or put them all on one track. So you certainly could import them as separate tracks, and we'll solo these here, and you could drag them out like so. The kick and the hi-hat and the snare, and you know, make yourself a drum line that would go something like, oh, right. Anyways, as you can see, this is not an ideal method by any stretch of the imagination. So, rather than do it that way, we're going to delete this, delete these three tracks, and add one new track, without a virtual instrument this time. You're going to take this track, and in this gray area here, double-click and type in drum samples, or something else that you will remember. It's good to get in the habit of labeling your tracks, like even here where we have all of these saying re-synth, we would want to relabel this one chords, this second one melody, and this third one bassline, or something, just so you can quickly tell at a glance what each track is doing. With that settled, go back to this drum samples track and open the FX panel. Because this is a blank track, Reaper will automatically prompt you to add something. If it doesn't, click Add and do it manually. We're going to head over to Instruments, and we are going to play with Samplomatic 5000, with its grandiose name. Add one of those, and try not to panic. To kick things off, hit Browse, go to the folder where you save the files, and select the kick. Hit Open, and that'll bring it in here. Now what Samplomatic does is it takes a sound file and maps it to a MIDI keyboard. By default, this pitch bends the sound, so if you hit a low note, it plays a low version of the sound, and a high note plays a high version of the sound. In this case, we just wanted to play the sound. So where it says pitch at start, change that to 0, and pitch bend here, semitones maximum, change that to 0 as well. Then, over here at note start, punch in 36, and note end should also be 36. That will make it so only one note will trigger this sound, and it will be the bass sound, not pitch bended in either direction. If you go back to your project file here and draw out a short MIDI clip with a drum line, you will see that Samplomatic very conveniently labels your MIDI keys with the name of the sound file. So this will play the kick, the other keys will not do anything. For now. Close that MIDI clip and go back to your track effects. Select Samplomatic and copy it, Control-C, or Command-C if you're on a Mac. I'll try to be a little more Mac friendly, and paste it twice. Then you'll want to select the second one, and where it says kick.wave, click this, and note that Samplomatic automatically makes available other audio files in the same folder as the one you imported. So select snare.wave, and then go to this last one and select hi-hat.wave. Now for snare, where it says note start, change that to 38, likewise for note end, and for hi-hat, go with 39 for both boxes. That'll set that up nice and cleanly. We aren't going to worry about any of the other things. Go back to your MIDI clip, and voila, you now have kick, hi-hat, snare, and hi-hat again. Just as an example. One thing to note about Samplomatic is that note length is important. Notice that, let's go ahead and solo this track, the snare has a tail on it. It fades out. If you make this note really short, that tail gets cut off. This can make fast drum rolls sound awkward. Or rather artificial. That can be a good effect if that's what you're writing, but it's good to be aware of that that's what'll happen. If you want a more realistic sounding drum roll, ideally you're going to want multiple drum samples set up so you can alternate between them and get something closer to the approximation of a person hitting a drum with 2 sticks. Anyway, scratch that for now and go ahead and put in a simple bass, hi-hat, snare, hi-hat drum line and close this MIDI clip. You can then copy this and paste it out a few times. Pasting is a little weird when you have a loop area defined, which is this highlighted section. It jumps by the loop section when you paste. So if you hit escape, that'll clear that for you, and you can then paste as normal. The loop section paste jumping is good for when you want to duplicate a large section of a song and have it insert itself seamlessly, but for now it's not something we'll make use of. So now you can mute Ur's drums and unmute the drum samples track, and alright, perfect, it works. Problem is, the hi-hat's really quiet and the snare's a little bit loud. Now, we could go back into these individual sections and tweak these, but that's not really easy to do here, and it's not the best way to do it either. What we're going to do instead is route the audio outputs of each one of these samples to its own track, which is something Reaper does very well. This is basically Reaper's calling card. It's a little complicated though, so bear with me, try to follow along, and don't worry if you have to watch this several times before you get the hang of it. First things first, we have 3 samples to route, so we'll want to add 3 new tracks. So I'll just hit Control-T 3 times, and that'll take care of that. For the sake of good habits, we'll label this kick out, snare out, and hi-hat out. Then, we'll go to this drum samples track and click this I/O button. This will open the input-output routing for this track. For now, all we're going to do is increase track channels to 6. Because we're working with stereo audio, each audio output has 2 channels, left and right. So for 3 outputs, we need 6 channels. Then we'll want to uncheck master/parent send. This means that this track no longer outputs audio. By default, each track outputs audio 1 and 2, or 1 stereo output. But unchecking that means we'll have to send the audio somewhere else to be outputted to the speakers. Okay, that's configured. Close this, and then the way to route audio in Reaper is to click and hold on this I/O button and drag to the track you want to send it to, and you'll get this headphone jack looking icon, which also looks kind of like an eyedropper. Then let go, and that'll route the audio to this track. Ignore everything about this window except for the bottom row. What it's doing is it's sending the audio data from channels 1 and 2 to the audio outputs of channel 1 and 2 on this track. It's also sending its MIDI data, and we don't need that in this case, so set that to none. Because there's no synthesizer on this output track, the MIDI data wouldn't actually do anything, but it's a good habit to get into with not sending MIDI data and anywhere it doesn't need to go. Okay, so this is set. You can close that, and then repeat the click and drag to this next track, but instead of 1 and 2, select your stereo source 3 and 4. Again, set MIDI data to none, and now that's set up. Lastly, we'll want to route to this last one and set stereo source 5 and 6, MIDI data none. Okay, if we listen to this now, you'll notice that everything's still coming out on this first track. It's because there's one more step. We have to go into the track properties and route each one of these to the proper output. If you click 2 out, you'll see this window. What this means is outputs 1 and 2 from this plugin are going to outputs 1 and 2 for this channel. That's fine for the kick, but for the snare, we want to take it instead to 3 and 4. And for the hi-hats, to 5 and 6. Just as a note, in this window you can click this plus or minus to add or subtract audio outputs 2 channels at a time. For now, close this, close your track properties, and now when you play it, you'll see the bass comes out here, hi-hats here, and the snare here. Now we can very easily turn up the volume on the hi-hats, turn down the volume on the snare a little bit, and voila! Listen to the whole thing. I would probably turn up the bass drum a little. And there you have it. You just learned a bit about routing audio and working with external media files. By the way, those media files are from freesound.org. There'll be a link to that in the description. I highly recommend that as a place to get samples and other media because, as the name implies, it's all free and a lot of it is public domain, which saves you the trouble of having to credit your sources. Lovely, lovely thing. Anyway, that's all for this bonus lesson. If this was kind of over your head, don't worry about it. We'll come back to these topics later on, and you'll have a little more experience under your belt, and it should be more straightforward then. But I wanted to put this out here because some people can make use of it now. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned.